I didn't pretend. That's the thing. I noticed her the second she leaned back and her shoulder found my chest, like it already knew the shape of me. The room was loud. Someone had turned the music up to drown out the clinking of glasses, but the moment landed quiet, heavy as a held breath. She didn't look at me right away. She just said it, half smiling, as if we were continuing a conversation I didn't remember starting. Don't pretend you didn't notice me. The party was supposed to be harmless. An after-hours thing at the bookstore where I'd just started working. Cheap wine and paper cups, the smell of dust and new ink. A string of warm lights looped through the aisles like an apology for the fluorescent glare we lived under during the day. I was the youngest there by a decade at least, hovering near the nonfiction shelves, pretending to read spines so I wouldn't look like I was waiting for someone to tell me where to stand. She arrived late. Of course she did. She always seemed to enter spaces as if she'd been invited twice. Once by name, once by expectation. Linen jacket, soft gray hair pinned back without fuss. Glasses pushed up and then down again as she scanned the room. She noticed everything. She noticed me. Not in a way that made me feel inspected, just included. We worked different hours, different sections. I knew her voice before I knew her habits. Low, careful with its humor, like she set words down instead of throwing them. Earlier that week, she'd shown me how to repair a loose binding without making a show of teaching. Her hands had moved fast, sure, and when I'd thanked her she'd said, "You'll forget this if you don't do it yourself." Then she waited, watched. Let me mess it up once before I got it right. At the party, she stood beside me while I poured wine I didn't really want. We talked about nothing. Whether that refused to decide what it was doing. A customer who tried to return a book because it made him sad. She laughed at that, a quick sound that surprised me. When someone called her name from across the room, she raised her cup, but didn't go. Not yet. Then the music shifted, something slower. People rearranged themselves without meaning to. That's when she leaned back. Not a stumble. A choice. Her shoulder blade pressed, a warm certainty through my shirt. I froze. Ridiculous, I know. Holding my cup mid-air like a statue that forgot its cue. She smelled faintly like citrus and paper. "I'm not in your way, am I?" she asked, still not turning. "No," I said too quickly. Then softer, "You're fine." She tilted her head just enough to glance up at me. Her eyes were calm, curious, as if she were checking the weather inside my face. "Good," she said, because my feet hurt. I wanted to say something clever. Something that sounded like a man who knew where his hands belonged. Instead, I shifted my weight so she could rest more comfortably, my arm hovering uselessly, careful not to touch. She noticed that too. Her mouth curved, not unkindly. "Relax," she said. "I won't break." Someone brushed past us. Her fingers caught my wrist for half a second. Apology or anchor, I couldn't tell. When she finally stepped away, the space she left felt louder than the music. Later, as people drifted out and the lights dimmed, I found myself replaying that moment with an intensity that didn't make sense. The way she'd said my name when she left. The way she hadn't hurried. I went home smelling like old books and cheap wine, and all I could think was how natural it felt when she leaned against me. Like a question I hadn't known I was waiting to be asked. The second time it happened, it was quieter. No music. No wine, no excuses built into the air. She asked me to stay late to help catalog a donation that had arrived in uneven boxes, the kind that smelled like basements in time. It was just the two of us after closing, the shop dim except for the lamps we dragged closer to the back table. Outside, the streetlights flickered like they were thinking about giving up. She was different that night, more contained. Her jacket stayed on. Her smile arrived late, if at all. "Sorry," she said, already sorting hardcovers into piles. "I know it's not exactly thrilling." "It's fine," I said. I meant it. I always did. We worked side by side without touching. That felt deliberate. Earlier in the week, she'd brushed past me without comment. But now there was space, clean, careful space, between our elbows. I watched her hands as she checked spines for damage, her thumb pressing lightly along the edges, as if the books might flinch. There was a small nick on one finger I hadn't seen before. A paper cut, maybe. She didn't mention it. "You don't have to be so gentle with them," I said, nodding at the stack. She smiled, tired this time. I do. They've already been handled enough. That was the first crack. Not big, just enough to notice. She yawned and covered her mouth, embarrassed by it. The lines around her eyes deepened when she laughed at herself, and for a second she looked older than I'd ever seen her. Older and human in a way that made my chest tighten. Long day? I asked. She hesitated. Her hands paused mid-sort. Long year, she said, then shook her head like she'd said too much. Sorry. Ignore me. I didn't. I couldn't. I noticed how she leaned back against the table, how her shoulders dropped when she thought no one was looking, how she rubbed at her wrist like something ached there. I wanted to ask what she was carrying, but the question felt dangerous, like stepping too close to a line drawn in chalk. Instead, I handed her a mug of coffee I'd reheated without asking. She stared at it for a second before taking it, both hands wrapped around the warmth. Thank you, she said, quieter than usual. We worked like that for another hour. Minimal talking. Shared glances when we found something strange, an inscription, a pressed flower, a note written in a looping hand. Each time, it felt like a small secret passed between us. At one point she laughed at something I said. Nothing funny, really, and the sound surprised her. She looked down immediately, like she was embarrassed by how easily it came. Careful, she said lightly. You'll get me in trouble. With who? I asked before thinking. She met my eyes then, held them longer than necessary. There was something there, hesitation, maybe regret, moving behind her expression like a door almost opening. With myself, she said. When we finished, she walked me to the front door. The lights behind us were off now, the shop reduced to shadows and reflections. She stood closer than she had all evening, close enough that I could feel the heat from her arm without touching it. Thanks for staying, she said. Anytime. She nodded, like she believed me. Her hand hovered, then rested briefly against my forearm. Just enough pressure to mean something, not enough to explain. Good night, she said. I watched her walk away, the door clicking shut between us, and realized I was holding my breath like she might turn back. The night, it almost happened. The rain came down sideways, loud enough to make the front windows shudder like they were reconsidering their commitment to glass. We were supposed to close early. A leak in the ceiling near history meant buckets on the floor and a handwritten sign taped to the door. Most people had cleared out by 6. She stayed anyway, sleeves rolled, hair loosening from its pin like it had given up pretending to behave. You can go, she said, not looking at me. I've done worse alone. I'll finish the returns, I said. It sounded neutral. It wasn't. The storm knocked the power out halfway through a sentence neither of us finished. The lights cut, the music died, and suddenly the shop was candle dim, emergency lamps glowing faint and amber. The rain filled the silence. She exhaled a laugh that didn't quite land. Of course, she said. Why wouldn't it? We sat on overturned crates near the counter, sharing the last working flashlight like it was a secret. Our knees were close. Not touching. Close enough to notice heat, the slight shift when one of us moved. I could see the tiredness on her face without the usual layers. No counter, no customers, no shelves between us. Do you ever think? She started, then stopped. Cleared her throat. Never mind. I waited. That felt important. She rubbed her palms together, slow, like she was warming them over something invisible. I'm bad at beginnings, she said finally. I tend to notice things too late. I didn't ask what she meant. I wanted to. Instead, I said, I notice things early. She smiled at that, small and crooked. Yes, she said. You do. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She froze, then checked it like she already knew who it was. The name on the screen tightened something in her jaw. She didn't answer at first. Let it ring again. And again. I should, she said, more to herself than me. She stepped away to take the call, voice low, controlled. I caught fragments, logistics, a sigh, something about tomorrow. When she hung up, she stayed where she was, back turned, shoulders stiff. I'm sorry, she said without facing me. That was history. It's okay, I said. It wasn't. But it was true enough. She turned then, leaning against the counter, closer than she'd been all night. The rain softened. The emergency light flickered. She looked at my mouth once, quickly, like it surprised her. There are rules, she said. And timing. And reasons people don't. I know, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My hands stayed in my pockets. That felt like restraint. Or fear. She stepped closer anyway. Not touching. Not yet. I could smell the rain on her jacket, the faint citrus again. She reached up, hesitated, then brushed a drop of water from my collarbone with her thumb. The contact was brief, electric, gone too fast to explain. I shouldn't, she whispered. I leaned in. Not enough to cross the line. Just enough to feel it disappear between us. And she didn't move away. We didn't touch after that. Not because we were being careful, but because silence had stepped in and claimed the space between us like it belonged there. It happened a few days later, during a shift that felt stretched thin. No rain, no excuses. Just the low hum of the heater and the sound of pages turning in the wrong sections. She was quieter than usual. Not distant, worse. Present, but somewhere else. Like she was standing beside herself, watching. I kept waiting for her to say something normal. Ask me to reshelve. Comment on a customer. Anything that would let us pretend the moment with the flashlight had been a misunderstanding. She didn't. Near closing, she asked if I wanted tea. Not coffee. Tea. That alone felt like a decision. We stood by the small counter near the back, mugs between us, steam curling up and disappearing before it could decide what shape to take. She didn't drink hers. Just held it, fingers wrapped too tightly around the ceramic. This can't keep happening, she said. I didn't answer right away. I watched the way her thumb traced the rim of the mug. Over and over. Like she was trying to wear it smooth. I don't know what this is, I said carefully. She let out a breath that sounded like relief and exhaustion at the same time. Exactly. We stood there, facing each other, not close enough to touch, not far enough to lie. Her eyes kept lifting to mine and then dropping, like she was checking to see if I'd changed. I'm not confused about you, she said. That's the problem. That landed harder than anything she could have said about rules or age or consequences. I felt my shoulders tense, my jaw tighten. I wanted to reach for her, not to pull her in, just to steady whatever was shaking behind her eyes. So what are you confused about? I asked. She hesitated. The pause stretched. I could hear someone laughing outside on the sidewalk, a sound from a world that didn't know what we were standing inside of. Myself, she said finally. The version of me that keeps noticing when you walk into a room. The part that leans when it shouldn't. I swallowed. I didn't plan any of this. I know, she said. That's what scares me. Her gaze held mine then. Long searching. Not asking for permission, asking for honesty. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't before. Like she could see every moment I'd replayed, every time I'd almost said something and didn't. I'm trying to be good, she said quietly. But I don't know what that even means anymore. I wanted to tell her she did no goodness to anyone at the cost of herself. I wanted to say her name. Instead, I stayed still. That felt like the only thing I could give her without taking something back. She set her mug down untouched. The sound was soft, final. I need you to understand, she said, voice barely above a whisper, that if I let this become anything real, I don't know how to stop. She looked at me like she was already apologizing. And for the first time, I understood that whatever this was, it wasn't going to fade quietly. The shift came disguised as an errand. She asked me to grab a box from the storage room upstairs, the one we barely used, filled with old event flyers and broken display stands. Her voice was steady when she said it, professional even, like the conversation from days earlier had been filed away underhandled. I believed her for about 10 minutes. The storage room smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. I was halfway through lifting the box when I noticed the envelope taped to the side. My name, handwritten. Not careful. Familiar. I stood there longer than I needed to. When I brought the box down, she was alone at the counter, glasses off, rubbing the bridge of her nose like the day had pressed too hard there. You didn't have to come all the way up, she said. It was on the box, I said, and handed her the envelope. She froze. Just for a second. Then she took it, slow, like it might bite. I meant to throw that away, she said. But you didn't. No, she said. I didn't. She didn't open it. Instead, she leaned back against the counter, eyes on the ceiling like she was doing math in her head. The shop was quiet, too quiet. Late afternoon light angled through the front windows, catching dust in the air and making it look intentional. "It's not what you think," she said. "I don't think anything," I said. "I haven't read it." She looked at me then, really looked, like she was measuring what I could carry without dropping it. "It's from my husband," she said. "Ex-husband." The word landed without ceremony. No sharp edge. Just wait. He left it here years ago. After everything. She laughed softly, without humor. "He said I'd understand it later." I never did. I nodded. Didn't ask what everything meant. Didn't need to. I noticed the way her fingers curled around the envelope, knuckles pale. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly, then flinched like she wanted to take it back. Not how he was. How he used to look at me. Like I was still becoming. I didn't know what to do with that. My chest felt tight. Not jealous exactly, smaller. Like I'd been mistaken for something I hadn't earned. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That wasn't fair." "It's okay," I said. It wasn't. But it wasn't wrong either. She finally opened the envelope. Inside was a folded note and an old photo. She stared at the photo longer than the words. Her mouth pressed into a line. Not pain. Recognition. "He thought I'd wait," she said. I didn't. And then one day I realized I'd been waiting anyway. Just for something else. She handed me the photo. Two people on a beach. Younger. Laughing into the wind. I gave it back without comment. "I don't want you to think you're a replacement," she said. "Or a distraction." "I don't," I said. Then, after a beat. "But I don't want to be invisible either." She closed her eyes at that. Just for a moment. When she opened them, there was something undone there. "I see you," she said. Quiet. Certain. She didn't touch me. Didn't need to. The words settled between us, rearranging the room. Later, when she tucked the envelope back into the box, not thrown away, not kept close, I realized the shift hadn't been about the past at all. It was about what she'd finally admitted she was capable of seeing. It didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where the world stopped and rearranged itself neatly around us. It was slower than that. Quieter. Like something finally giving up the effort of holding. The shop closed early that night. No announcement. No reason anyone else needed. She flipped the sign on the door and didn't look at me when she did it. Just stood there for a second longer than necessary, hands still on the glass, as if she were listening for objections. We didn't talk much after that. She put the kettle on. I wiped down a counter that was already clean. We moved through the space like people who knew each other's habits too well to pretend otherwise. "I don't want to make promises," she said eventually. Not facing me. "I've broken enough by trying to mean them." "I'm not asking for one," I said. That made her turn. Her expression wasn't guarded anymore. It was tired. Honest. The kind of honesty that costs something. "I don't know what this looks like," she said. "Outside of here." "I know," I said. "But I know what it feels like in here." She nodded once. Just once. Like that was enough to agree to. We sat on the floor near the back wall, backs against the shelves, legs stretched out because neither of us suggested a chair. The heater clicked on and off. Somewhere above us, pipes knocked like they were thinking out loud. It felt strange how ordinary everything was. How unceremonious. She leaned her head back, eyes closed. I watched the rise and fall of her chest, the way her breath slowed when she stopped trying to manage it. After a minute, her hand shifted, palm open beside her on the floor. Not reaching. Just there. I took it. No spark. No jolt. Just warmth and the quiet relief of not pretending my hands belonged anywhere else. Her fingers curled around mine slowly, deliberately, like she was making sure she was awake. "I was afraid," she said, eyes still closed, "that if I let myself feel this, I'd disappear into it." "You're still here," I said. "So are you," she replied. She opened her eyes then and looked at me, not searching, not warning, just looking. I leaned my forehead against hers, light enough that we could pull away without effort. Neither of us did. We stayed like that for a long time. Long enough that the kettle went cold. Long enough that the city outside kept moving without noticing we'd stopped. When we finally stood, she didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She squeezed my hand once before letting go. "We'll be careful," she said. "We'll be honest," I said. She smiled at that. Small. Real. When I left, she watched from the doorway, not crossing the line between inside and out. I didn't look back right away. I wanted the feeling of walking away to be mine. Later, lying in the dark, I realized the collapse hadn't been dramatic at all. It had been quiet. And somehow, that made it hold. I'm telling this from some distance now. Not years, just enough time for things to settle into their real shapes. Enough to see what lasted and what quietly let go. We never announced anything. No lines crossed in public. No explanations offered to people who didn't ask. What changed wasn't visible from the outside anyway. It showed up in smaller ways. How she stopped bracing when she laughed. How I learned the difference between waiting and listening. We kept the shop the same. Same hours. Same routines. But there was an ease that hadn't been there before, like the room itself had exhaled. Sometimes we worked in silence that felt full instead of tense. Sometimes we talked about things that had nothing to do with us. Books, weather, the way people leave notes inside novels and expect them to be found. What surprised me most was how little it needed to be dramatic to be real. She didn't suddenly become fearless. I didn't become wiser overnight. There were days she pulled back, days I talked too much. There were moments when the gap between our lives showed itself. Schedules, histories, the gravity of things already lived. We didn't pretend those differences didn't exist. We just stopped letting them decide everything. Once, weeks later, she said, I used to think love was supposed to arrive like proof. I asked what she meant. That it should explain itself, she said. Loudly. Now, when she reaches for my hand, still careful, still deliberate, it doesn't explain anything. It just is. And somehow that's enough. I changed too. I stopped trying to be impressive. Stopped measuring moments by what they might become. I learned that wanting something doesn't make it fragile. Rushing it does. I learned that being seen isn't about intensity. It's about consistency. Showing up without demanding a shape in return. There are still boundaries. There's still patience. This isn't a story about everything working out perfectly. It's about two people choosing not to look away anymore. About letting something grow at the speed it can survive. Sometimes I think back to that first night, the party, the music, the way she leaned against me and said, "Don't pretend you didn't notice me." I didn't understand then that noticing is only the beginning. Staying present is the harder part. Now, when she leans into me, there's no question in it. No test. Just trust, built quietly, earned slowly. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The most honest love doesn't rush in shouting. It arrives, sits beside you, and waits until you're ready to stay. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?